is what it is. Any child that has a need, a difficulty in terms of whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it has to do with intellectual processing, whether it has to do with behaviors, that child just needs that additional support to be able to perform the same activities that children of their age typically would perform without support. And when we say special needs, we exactly would try to, in clinical terms, we're looking at functionality, like she said, right? We're looking at functionality. This child would require assistance because of what they're presenting with, right? So they would require assistance to perform certain functions in life, whether to learn, whether to understand social nuances and know how to behave in a social situation, whether to understand their own emotions and be able to interpret and respond to the different things that happen around them. This child basically has a need for a support to manage those everyday realities. And of course, we are familiar with some such terminologies as autism, Down syndrome, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, cerebral palsy, and the ones that I call the invisible disorders. That's the specific learning disabilities whereby you really don't know that that is what the child is going through. So again, I'm going to ask, so amongst us, I have seen a child presenting with one of these presentations. Not that I have a child, okay, as a children's church teacher, as a parent on this call, I know a child that has this, and this is how I know. Can I get one volunteer, please? One more volunteer, apart from Dr. Dubose that has spoken. Anybody?
Okay, so I would like to.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so sometimes we notice a bit of withdrawal where a child will just not cooperate.
Okay.
You know, you ask everybody to come this way, he or she just wants to stand alone. He or she just don't want to do what others are doing. That sometimes not responding. When you call out for he or she, they're not just answering you. So those are one of the things that.
So you have seen children like that. Would you by any means know, okay, this is what I think is going on with the child? From this whole long list we have called, would you be able to point out to say, okay, I think that child, right, maybe has ADHD or autism or cerebral palsy?
Okay, so not clinically, yeah, but then you can always just Google one of these things like, okay, so if a child has this one or two symptoms, what could probably be the cause? So I will not definitely say, okay, this is what we have diagnosed, but then we can just always guess, just a guesswork.
Okay, all right, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so let's go on. Thank you for that feedback. I just want to know what we have seen, the children that we have met, and how they present. Okay, so let's go on. So when we talk about special needs and disabilities and all of that, a lot of times there's always something that has happened along the line for that child, because we all want to know what causes these things. How do we know that a child has an issue? And that brings us to when we talk about typical developmental milestones. I know a lot of us are familiar. You go to baby center. Every first time mom goes to baby center, and then they begin to send you those milestones when your child is 6 months, when your child is 9 months, when your child is 12 months, and all of those things. So we are able to keep track because we are checking those milestones that a child is supposed to achieve. If we have a situation where the child is not meeting with certain milestones as expected, whether it's language, in which case you're looking at communication skills, the child is not understanding, or the child is not being expressive, or you're looking at the physical needs, the child that is supposed to be seated at 6 months, the child is not sitting, the child that is supposed to have neck control at 3 months, the child is not having all of those things. Sometimes it might be due to what you would call a developmental delay. The fact that a child is not meeting their milestones, like when we compare them with other children, does not necessarily translate to a disability. There's a difference, right? So sometimes some children would have those delays. I know some of us are familiar when they say every child will achieve their milestones, but all children will not achieve it at the same time. And it's true, because our home environments are different, our genetic makeups are different, our histories are different, our opportunities and the opportunities we create for our children are also different, right? Some children spend majority of their time on their high chairs. For such a child, when you have a child that spends a lot of time on their high chair and the child that is always moving around, has a free environment to walk around, to cruise and all of that, without jazz, without anything, the child that is moving around more frequently will pick up on motor milestones before the child that is always on the high chair, because of the presentation of opportunities. In like manner, a child that is born into a home where everybody is on the calm side, mommy doesn't talk, daddy doesn't talk, everybody is quiet, will be different from a child that the mom is a talkative, the dad is a talkative, everybody talks in their home, right? So the child hears lots of words and all of those things. So when you bring the child from a home where there's a lot of quiet and a child that is in a very verbally rich environment, you'll find that discrepancy in terms of how they meet their milestones, right? So some children will have those minimal delays, right? And over time, they could overcome them, it would resolve. However, disabilities, when we talk about disabilities, they're due to impairments, sometimes due to birth difficulties, sometimes due to birth defects, sometimes they are inexplicable, right? As would find sometimes in the case of children on the autism spectrum, right? For some children, for genetic presentations, children with chromosomal disorders, usually it's something that is from the gene. Immediately those children are given birth to, we would see that there's something going on with that child. And then, of course, that child should begin to get support. For children with cerebral palsy, right? When they are born, sometimes certain events trigger it, okay? In some cases, I think Dr. Odubose will be more familiar with that. Sometimes the one I'm familiar with that we see a lot in terms of clinic presentations is when you have children that have had jaundice that was not properly managed, right? A lot of times, those children could end up having cerebral palsy, okay? And then you would see these things and you would know that this one is development that has gone atypical, right? It is different from when a child has a delay. And we try to make those differences because you want to know when and how to provide support for that child. And for children that would have a disability or a disorder or will be neurodivergent, the amount of care usually can be from long-term to lifetime, right? It means that for those children, those things from the lens of and the perspective of human understanding, they don't go away. It's something that we continue to manage until the child grows. But of course, we are people of faith. We always believe that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above the things that we hope for. So even when we have children with those presentations, we are hopeful of the things that God is able to do in their lives. So that's just the major difference between a developmental delay and a disability. And when we say a child already has a disability or a disorder, that's where the special needs comes from, right? So the special needs is due to the fact that, oh, something has gone wrong physically, emotionally, and because of that, there's that extra need for care and support. And like I always say, when I talk to children's church teachers, sometimes we get caught up in all of those presentations, but I want to encourage you today, no matter how severe a child's presentation is, the child is always running up and down. In fact, immediately the child comes to church, you don't have rest, whether you know what is going on or you don't know, by the help of the Holy Spirit, there's always something that can be done for every child that God brings our way. So I want us to tuck that somewhere in our spirits, because when we go out on Sunday as children's church teachers, when we go to meet these children, we are not going of our own selves. right? We are going by the help of the Holy Spirit. And sometimes it's not in the things that we do, it's in the help of the Holy Spirit that we receive. There are some days I've over prepared. Okay, today this child is coming. We are going to be very active today. We need to do this. And you get to church and the child is just calm. God has just taken control from the time you set up praying and all of that. Sometimes God sends you help. So whatever it is, just know that there's always something that you can do to help that child. So I'm not going to have to go through all of this because of our time, right? I'll just skip through and go on straight to the different presentations because that's very critical to this meeting. We want to know when we see these children, what exactly is going on and how can we provide the support. We are talking about autism, we talked about cerebral palsy, we've talked about specific learning disabilities and all of that. So when it comes to autism, right, sometimes there are those children that our sister mentioned that they want to be on their own and they may not want to talk to you. And what exactly is going on with a child on the autism spectrum? Basically, for the child on the autism spectrum, what has happened is there's been a breach in terms of how they process information related to language learning, how they process information in relation to social interaction and social expression, awareness, social awareness expression. And there's always been a breach in terms of how the brain processes information in terms of how well I need to do things and how often I need to do those things. So we'll say autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And that's because it presents when the child is very young and it impacts three core areas, like I mentioned, language, social skills, and behaviors. How the brain begins to interpret all of these things changes and is quite much more different from the way you and I typically would, right? So what are those things that you may see when you meet a child on the autism spectrum? Right from when they are small, you would find that a child on the autism spectrum, apologies just a little, I think my phone is, okay. So typically, when you meet a child on the autism spectrum, the first thing parents tell us is, oh, my child talks, but my child is not communicating, right? In which case, the child is saying some things, perhaps singing nursery rhymes, but in terms of expressive communication to get needs met, that child is not doing that. You also find out that the child on the autism spectrum may not play appropriately with toys. Some children get caught up with certain parts of that toy, like the little boy you see here playing with the car. Sometimes he's not fascinated with the car as a whole. He might be fascinated with the wheels and how the wheels go round about in that place. And sometimes he just wants to watch the car go back and forth rather than create playthings. You know how children would play, oh, my car, the green car bumps into the yellow car, we go over a bridge, oh, pom pom, there's traffic, and all of those things that children try to do. You may not see that in a child on the autism spectrum. And then, of course, you have this also inability to relate with others. So for the child on the autism spectrum, a lot of times it is overwhelming. The demands for social interaction are overwhelming because they are not able to process different modalities of information from the different senses. Sound is coming, visual is coming, touch is coming, it's a lot. So the child really does not want to be in the midst of other children. And in cases where they are forced to, sometimes you find out that maybe a child could pinch or try to bite or any of those behaviors that we term as inappropriate, that this child cannot communicate. That's the only way the child can say, I don't want you in my space. Can you please excuse me?